The company that sells you your gas is called BP, British Petroleum. You see it on highways, in cities, on your credit card statements. An ordinary brand, familiar, harmless. What this brand hides, almost nobody knows. BP is the direct heir of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, the company that pumped Iran's subsoil since 1908, while returning less than 16% of its profits to Iran. The company, whose nationalization by a democratically elected prime minister triggered in 1953 the first government overthrow operation in CIA history. An operation that cost a few $1 million, toppled the democracy in 3 days, and installed in power a Shah who would torture his people for 26 years with tools provided by Washington. This operation has a name, Operation Ajax. It has an architect, Kermit Roosevelt, grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, who enters Iran in the trunk of a car under a false name with a briefcase full of money. And it has produced, through a documented causal chain that nobody teaches you to see, exactly what you read in your newspapers this morning about the Iran war. BP still exists. It's making profits this quarter. It will make them next quarter. Mossadegh, the man who was overthrown so it could recover its oil, died under house arrest in 1967 at his Ahmadabad estate, never having been allowed to leave Iran. This video traces the path between these two facts, between BP and the Iran war, between 1953 and 2025, with declassified archives, verifiable names, and a question at the end you won't be able to ignore. Here's what most of us know about Iran and the West. In 1979, an Islamic revolution overthrows the Shah of Iran. Students take 52 Americans hostage in their embassy in Tehran for 444 days. Ayatollah Khomeini establishes a theocracy. Iran becomes Washington's sworn enemy. Then comes the nuclear program, sanctions, armed proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis. And today, an open war with Israel threatening to set the entire region ablaze. That's the official narrative, the one found in newspapers, in heads of state speeches, in 3-minute summaries on news channels. Iran is an Islamic revolution that decided one day in 1979 to hate the West. This narrative isn't false, but it's incomplete in a way that changes everything. Because it starts in 1979, and the story, it starts in 1901. We're in Persia. The country is still called Persia. In May 1901, a British businessman named William Knox D'Arcy presents himself at the court of Shah Muzaffar ad-Din. D'Arcy made his fortune in Australian gold mines. He's 50 years old, with a well-groomed mustache, the generous belly of those who never lack for anything. And he comes with a proposition. He wants the right to search for oil beneath Iranian soil. On almost the entire territory, 1,200,000 square kilometers. In exchange, he offers £20,000 sterling, 20,000 more pounds in shares of his future company, and 16% of future profits. The Shah signs. His ministers sign. What the documents don't say, but what French experts reveal a few years later, is that the Chancellor and the Foreign Minister received personal bribes for having convinced the sovereign to accept. Persia has just sold its subsoil for a handful of bills and a few discreet envelopes. For 7 years, D'Arcy drills. He spends. He grows impatient.
the wells are dry. British investors begin to doubt. And then, on the morning of May 26, 1908, in a place called Masjed Suleiman in Khuzestan, at 50 meters depth, oil gushes forth. The column of crude rises 18 meters into the air. Workers run, engineers weep, and someone, somewhere in London, immediately understands that the world has just changed. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company is founded immediately afterward. And in 1913, a man enters the history of this affair. His name is Winston Churchill. He's 39 years old, with clear eyes and absolute certainty about what modern warfare will be. He's just been appointed First Lord of the Admiralty, the British Navy Minister. And he understands, before almost everyone else, one simple thing. Warships must switch from coal to oil. Faster, more powerful, more efficient. But for that, the British Empire needs a safe, controlled, sovereign oil source. In 1914, Churchill convinces the British government to buy 51% of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company for £2 million. The British state becomes the principal shareholder. Iranian oil officially becomes a matter of state. Iran, for its part, receives 16% of profits, according to the agreement signed in 1901. And when, in 1933, a new agreement is negotiated, under pressure, in a context where the previous Shah is weakened, this figure barely rises. At Abadan, on the Shat al-Arab, the company builds the world's largest refinery. Tens of thousands of barrels processed each day, colossal profits heading to London, and the Iranian workers who handle the pipes, breathe the vapors, work 12 hours in the Khuzestan heat, live in barracks separated from British employees by walls and internal regulations. Iranians don't have the right to enter clubs reserved for the British, not the right to ride in the same buses, not the right to access management positions. Between 1945 and 1950, the net profits of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, the company changed its name at the same time as the country in 1935, are almost 3 times higher than the royalties paid to Iran over the entire same period. 3 times. Iran extracts its own oil from its own land with its own workers and receives less than 1/3 of what the foreign company that resells it receives. For 50 years, nobody says anything. Or rather, people say it, Iranian parliamentarians, journalists, intellectuals, but successive governments don't have the political strength to resist. Persia, then Iran, is a country weakened by decades of foreign interference. The British in the south, the Russians in the north, 2 military occupations during World War II. An exhausted country, methodically dispossessed of what should be its principal wealth. And then, in 1951, something changes. A man speaks before the Iranian parliament. Not a revolutionary, not a religious figure. A jurist, a constitutionalist. A man who studied law in Paris and obtained his doctorate in Neuchâtel. A man who believes in institutions, in law, in the sovereignty of peoples. His name is Mohammad Mossadegh, and what he's about to do will shake the British Empire to its foundations. Mohammad Mossadegh was born in 1882 in Tehran, son of a Shah's finance minister and a princess from the Qajar royal family. A child of Iranian aristocracy, raised in the corridors of power, accustomed from childhood to palace intrigues and the silent compromises that keep elites in place. He could have stayed there, comfortable, protected, invisible. He chose otherwise. At 19, he left to study law in Paris, at the Sorbonne, then at the École Libre des Sciences Politiques. He discovered the Enlightenment, constitutional law, the idea that a people's sovereignty over its own territory isn't a favor granted by the powerful, it's a fundamental right. He returned to Iran, left again, obtained his doctorate in law at Neuchâtel in Switzerland, first Iranian to earn this title in a European country. He's 32. He speaks fluent French. He's read Montesquieu, Rousseau, the great theorists of the social contract. He's not an extremist. He's a man of law. He returns to Iran and enters politics. Provincial governor, finance minister, foreign minister, several times. He resigns as many times as he's appointed. Each time the power asks him to endorse something he deems contrary to his country's dignity. In 1928, exhausted, he withdraws to his Ahmadabad estate. He's 46. He thinks his political life is over. It's only beginning. In 1941, the Allies militarily occupy Iran to secure supply routes to the USSR. Shah Reza Pahlavi, judged too close to Nazi Germany, is forced to abdicate. His son, Mohammad Reza, 22 years old, ascends the throne. The country is humiliated, occupied, crossed by foreign soldiers who didn't ask permission. Mossadegh emerges from retirement. He's re-elected to parliament. His reputation as an honest, incorruptible man, independent of any foreign power, earns him immense popular support. And in 1951, he finally says what millions of Iranians have been thinking for decades. The oil is ours. On March 15, 1951, the Iranian parliament votes to nationalize the oil industry almost unanimously. On April 30th, the National Iranian Oil Company is created to take over the Anglo-Iranian installations. On May 1st, the Shah signs the law, and on April 29th, Mohammad Mossadegh is appointed Prime Minister with 99 votes out of 102. A landslide. In the streets of Tehran, people weep with joy. Men embrace strangers. Women come out on balconies. It's an improvised national holiday. Iran reclaims what belongs to it after 50 years. In London, the reaction is immediate and furious. The British government brings the matter before the International Court of Justice in The Hague. It requests urgent provisional measures. It mobilizes its diplomats, its lawyers, its allies. It seizes the United Nations Security Council. And Mossadegh goes to The Hague. He pleads himself, in French, for hours. He explains calmly, with the precision of a jurist, and the dignity of a man who knows he's right, that a state's sovereignty over its natural resources isn't negotiable, that what Iran has done is legal, that what the Anglo-Iranian has done for 50 years was documented spoliation. The court rules in his favor. It declares itself incompetent to judge the matter, which concretely means it recognizes Iran's right to nationalize. The Security Council dismisses the case, and on December 8, 1951, Time magazine names Mohammad Mossadegh Man of the Year, not as a dangerous revolutionary, as a symbol. The symbol of a new aspiration in the world, that of colonized peoples demanding control of their own destiny. Time writes of him that he's the most important figure in the Middle East, and that his oil nationalization has changed the balance of power in the region irreversibly. The entire world looks at Iran and sees something unprecedented. A poor, weakened country standing up to the British Empire before international courts, and winning. In Washington, President Truman observes with a certain sympathy. The United States itself has a history of rebellion against British domination. And Mossadegh isn't a communist. He's a liberal nationalist, a constitutionalist, a man who believes in parliamentary democracy. Truman prefers negotiation to coup. He sends mediators. He proposes compromises. But in London, Churchill, back in power in October 1951, has no intention of negotiating anything whatsoever. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company is 50 years of British investments. It's Her Majesty's Navy. It's the empire. You don't cede that to an old gentleman in pajamas who cries in international tribunals. Because that's Mossadegh's tactic. He receives journalists lying in his bed, wrapped in his dressing gown, cheeks wet with authentic tears. He's a man who cries easily, who knows it, and who uses this apparent fragility as a diplomatic weapon. Foreign correspondents love it. The image of the old Prime Minister in pajamas confronting perfidious Albion goes around the world. In London, they hate him all the more. And it's at this moment, late 1952, that the British knock on another door. Not that of the tribunals, not that of the diplomats, that of the CIA. Before even knocking on the CIA's door, Britain has already drawn its first weapon. And this weapon isn't military, it's economic. As soon as nationalization is voted in May 1951, the British government organizes something formidable in its simplicity: a global embargo on Iranian oil. All countries allied with London receive the same message. Whoever buys Iranian oil buys stolen goods. Whoever helps Iran sell its oil is complicit in illegal expropriation. The major international oil companies, American, Dutch, French, apply the embargo without question. They have too much to lose by crossing London. The result is immediate and brutal. In 1950, Iran exported 54 million tons of oil. In 1952, exports fall to 132,000 tons, a drop of more than 99%. The Abadan refinery, the world's largest, runs empty. British technicians have left the country on their government's orders, taking with them technical manuals, maintenance codes, installation plans. A way of saying, without us, you don't know how to run what you just nationalized. Iran finds itself owner of its oil, but unable to sell it, unable to refine it properly, unable to transport it. Tankers that dare load Iranian crude risk legal proceedings in British ports worldwide. State coffers empty. Civil servants' salaries arrive late. Infrastructure projects stop. The rial loses value. In Tehran's bazaars, prices rise. The middle class that had enthusiastically supported Mossadegh begins to suffer concretely. And the Prime Minister's political enemies, monarchists, conservative religious figures, officers linked to the court, begin to recover this discontent. Mossadegh holds on. He reduces the state budget. He launches social reforms, social security, rent limitation, partial agrarian reform, to maintain popular support. He travels to New York in October 1951 to plead at the UN. A small man in a beige raincoat, 69 years old, who mounts the podium and calmly tells the representatives of 55 nations that his country is being economically strangled for having dared to claim what belongs to it. The applause in the hall is sustained. The votes, they don't come. In November 1952, Mossadegh breaks diplomatic relations with the United Kingdom. He expels the British ambassador and closes the consulate. It's a sovereign, legal gesture, and one that cuts the main line of communication between London and its agents in Tehran. The British lose their official eyes and ears in Iran. What they don't lose is their clandestine network. Because the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, during 50 years of presence in Iran, didn't only extract oil. It maintained networks, paid journalists, recruited army officers, connected influential religious figures, paid tribal chiefs. An underground infrastructure of influence that crosses the entire country, and that the ambassador's expulsion doesn't dismantle. It's this infrastructure that MI6 will activate. And it's this infrastructure it will sell to the Americans as the principal argument to convince them to enter the game. Because the British have a problem. Their main lever since 1953 is Washington, and Washington, under Truman, refuses the coup. Truman doesn't like Mossadegh. He finds him impractical, emotional, dangerous for regional stability. But he refuses to overthrow a democratically elected government. It's a line he won't cross. So the British wait. They wait for the American presidential election of November 1952. Dwight Eisenhower wins the election with a comfortable majority. Army general during World War II, hero of the landing, man of order and discipline. His kindred spirits arrive with him. Allen Dulles at the head of the CIA, John Foster Dulles at the State Department. Two brothers, two men convinced that the Cold War is won everywhere, including in countries that haven't yet chosen their side. And that's when the British play their most effective card. They no longer talk about oil, they talk about communism. They explain to the new Eisenhower administration that Mossadegh is unstable, that he relies on the Iranian Communist Party, the Tudeh, to maintain his popular support, that if the economic situation continues to deteriorate, Iran could fall into the Soviet orbit, that the USSR is only waiting for an opening to seize a country that shares thousands of kilometers of border with it, that leaving Mossadegh in place is offering the Middle East to Moscow. It's a carefully constructed lie. Mossadegh isn't a communist. He hates communism much as he hates British imperialism. He's always kept the Tudeh at a distance from his government. But nuance is the first victim of strategy. Eisenhower listens, and in April 1953, Allen Dulles approves the launch of a secret operation. $1 million is made available, with a simple and chilling instruction in its concision. This money must be used, in any way whatsoever, to cause Mossadegh's fall. The operation is called TP Ajax, and the man they sent to Tehran to direct it enters history discreetly, one evening in July 1953, under a false name. His name is James Lockwood. At least that's what his passport says when he crosses the Iranian border, hidden in a car's trunk, on the night of July 19th, 1953. His real name is Kermit Roosevelt Jr. He's 37 years old, high receding forehead, black framed glasses, sober suit. The kind of man you don't look at twice in a hallway. A British colleague will, later, describe him as the last person you'd imagine doing dirty work. He speaks softly. He's polite. He's a Harvard graduate, and his grandfather was named Theodore Roosevelt, 26th President of the United States. Kermit Roosevelt didn't come as a tourist. He came to overthrow a government. In his briefcase, cash. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in Iranian bills, clandestinely transported by CIA networks. And in his head,
a three-part plan that the CIA and MI6 took 3 months to build during secret meetings in Cyprus and Beirut. First part, propaganda. For several weeks already, before Roosevelt's arrival, CIA agents have begun buying Iranian journalists. Articles are commissioned, paid for, published. They present Mossadegh as a Moscow agent, as a man preparing the monarchy's dissolution, as a threat to Islam. CIA agents pose as Mossadegh supporters and threaten religious leaders in his name to turn them against him. False leaflets circulate. False statements are attributed to the Prime Minister. Reality blurs methodically. Second part, corruption of military elites. Superior officers of the Iranian army are approached one by one. Some accept money. Others are convinced by carefully calibrated patriotic arguments. Stability, the monarchy, the communist danger. A general is designated to lead the replacement government. His name is Fazlollah Zahedi. He collaborated with the Nazis during World War II and was imprisoned by the British for it. This is the man Washington and London have chosen to replace a Democrat. Third part, crowds. Roosevelt will use a technique that American intelligence services have just invented and will perfect over the following decades. He'll buy demonstrators. Hundreds of thousands of rials are distributed to men recruited in the poor neighborhoods of South Tehran, in sports clubs, in circles close to the local underworld. Their mission? Go into the streets shouting against Mossadegh. Create the impression of a spontaneous popular movement. Make people believe that the Iranian people reject their prime minister. On August 15, 1953, the first coup is attempted. It fails completely. The officer charged with arresting Mossadegh is himself arrested upon arrival. Mossadegh, warned, publicly declares he has just thwarted a coup d'état. The Shah, who had signed the dismissal decrees, panics. He flees the country by plane, first to Baghdad, then to Rome. Western embassies hold their breath. In Washington, the CIA sends a cable to Roosevelt. The operation is compromised. You must evacuate. Roosevelt refuses. There's a man in the room with him when this cable arrives. This man will later say that Roosevelt read the evacuation order, placed it on the table, and said simply, "We're not done yet." It's this disobedience that will change history. For 4 days, Roosevelt works. He reactivates his networks. He redistributes money. He convinces hesitant officers. He circulates false information that the army is already on the Shah's side. He organizes new demonstrations, larger, better funded, and he succeeds in rallying a crucial element he didn't have in the first attempt. Ayatollah Kashani, influential religious leader and former Mossadegh ally, switches sides. Declassified documents suggest that CIA money may have played a role in this reversal. On August 19, 1953, everything happens in a few hours. Crowds assembled and directed by Roosevelt's agents pour into Tehran's streets. Soldiers loyal to the Shah, those mobilized by officers corrupted by the CIA, take position at the city's strategic points. Mossadegh's official residence is surrounded. Fighting kills several hundred in the capital's streets. Mossadegh escapes by a garden ladder. He hides at acquaintances' homes for 24 hours before surrendering. That evening, the Shah returns from exile. He lands in Tehran and meets Kermit Roosevelt before almost anyone else. He tells him something Roosevelt will quote word for word in his memoirs, published 26 years later. "I owe my throne to God, to my people, to my army.
And to you. Roosevelt returns to the United States a hero. Eisenhower wants to meet him personally for a debriefing. John Foster Dulles listens to him present the operation and, according to Roosevelt himself, purrs like a big cat planning the next one. Operation Ajax cost a few $1,000,000. It overthrew an elected government. It restored a monarchy. And it opened the way for American oil companies to enter the Iranian market, which the United Kingdom had always refused. Because you have to understand this detail. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company doesn't exactly recover its assets. The new oil consortium that forms after the coup d'etat is different. British Petroleum, Anglo-Iranian has changed its name, gets 40%. But American companies, grouped around Standard Oil and its subsidiaries, get 40% as well. Shell, 14%, and Total, the French company, 6%. The United States has entered the game, officially to save Iran from communism, concretely, to take their share of Iranian oil. Mossadegh, for his part, is tried by a military tribunal in November 1953. He defends himself, standing, without a lawyer, with the same legal precision that made him famous at The Hague. He's sentenced to death. The Shah will commute his sentence to 3 years in prison, then to house arrest for life at his Ahmadabad estate. He will never leave this domain again. He will die there in March 1967 at 84 years old. His last public act is a letter to his son. In it, he writes that he regrets nothing, that what he did, he would do again, that a people's sovereignty over its natural resources isn't an ideal, it's a necessity. He will never know that 60 years later, in 2013, the CIA will officially publish the documents confirming its role in the coup d'etat. That Barack Obama, in his Cairo speech in 2009, will publicly recognize that the United States overthrew a democratically elected government in Iran. That the word Ajax will become, for following Iranian generations, synonymous with one precise thing: proof that the West says democracy and does the opposite when its interests are at stake. But before going further, we must return to something. Because in everything you've just heard, one actor is missing. The one who conceived everything. The one without whom Roosevelt would never have had the budget, the network, or the plan. The Americans executed. The British imagined and gave it a name: Operation Ajax. The official history of Operation Ajax is an American story. Kermit Roosevelt, the CIA, Allen Dulles' $1 million. That's the narrative that has dominated for decades because the Americans finally recognized their role in 2013 and published their archives. The British, they've never officially recognized anything. Never. Not a statement, not a declassified archive, not an apology, not even a formal confirmation of their participation. To this day, the British government maintains absolute institutional silence about what happened in Iran in August 1953. This silence isn't innocence. It's caution. Because American declassified documents, participants' memoirs, and the work of historians who have reconstructed the operation piece by piece for 40 years all tell the same thing. Operation Ajax was conceived by the British. Not co-conceived, conceived. The Americans provided the money and the principal executor. The British provided the coup's architecture, the Iranian network, and the political argument that convinced Washington to participate. Let's go back to the autumn of 1952. The British government knows two things. First, its network of influence in Iran is intact, despite the diplomatic break. My 6 agents still operate from the Australian embassy, which serves as cover. Second, Truman won't budge.
The Americans refuse the coup under this administration, so the British wait for Eisenhower. And as soon as the election result is known, in November 1952, they prepare their dossier. A dossier that doesn't talk about oil, a dossier that talks about Moscow. In January 1953, my 6 agents meet their CIA counterparts in Washington. They bring analyses, reports, assessments of the communist risk in Iran. They explain that the Tudeh, the Iranian Communist Party, is infiltrating the Iranian army. That if Mossadegh remains in power another year, Iran will be lost to the West. That the window to act is closing rapidly. What declassified documents reveal is that this assessment was deliberately exaggerated. The Tudeh was active, certainly, but Mossadegh kept it at a distance from his government. The Iranian army wasn't infiltrated to the point of representing an immediate danger. The communist risk was a rhetorical tool, carefully calibrated to hit exactly the sensitive point of the new Republican administration. It works perfectly. In March 1953, the CIA and MI6 meet in Cyprus to work together on operational details. It's there that the plan takes its final form. Donald Wilbur, CIA agent and Middle East specialist, drafts the official planning document, the TP Ajax plan. But he works in close collaboration with his British counterparts, who bring something irreplaceable: knowledge of Iranian terrain. The names of viable officers, mobilizable tribal networks, journalists already on their payroll. 50 years of colonial presence transformed into operational capital. There's a detail in this story that says everything. Princess Ashraf, the Shah's twin sister, is contacted by the British in July 1953 while she's in Paris. She's persuaded to return secretly to Tehran, despite her brother's formal prohibition, who fears for her safety, to convince the Shah to sign Mossadegh's dismissal decrees. She accepts. She travels. She meets her brother. And according to testimonies, it's a suitcase filled with furs and jewelry offered by British agents that facilitated her cooperation. A suitcase of furs to prepare the overthrow of a democracy. Churchill, for his part, follows the operation from London with particular attention. He's 79 years old. He's come from far. A severe stroke in June 1953 left him partially paralyzed, but he insists on staying informed. On July 1st, 1953, it's he who formally approves the plan on the British side. 10 days later, Eisenhower signs in turn. 2 former World War II combatants, 2 men who pushed back Hitler, who defended democracy against tyranny, who together approve, in their respective offices in London and Washington, the overthrow of a democratically elected prime minister because he dared to nationalize his country's oil. In 2019, an Iranian documentary titled Coup 53 brings a final troubling element. Director Taghi Amirani gets his hands on documents proving it was a British MI6 agent, not Roosevelt, who really coordinated operations on the ground in Tehran during the decisive days of August 1953. Roosevelt was the American face of the operation, but the hands that held the strings were British. The United Kingdom still hasn't commented. What we know with certainty is the result. Mossadegh in prison, the Shah on his throne, the oil in Western consortium hands, and a country of 20 million people placed back under foreign tutelage for an entire generation. This country will pay for this choice for 26 years, in its flesh, in its prisons, in its torture chambers. If you find this content enlightening,
You can support it by clicking on the first link in the pinned comment. Let's return to the Shah. The Shah is back on his throne. He's 34 years old. He fled his own country twice in 2 years. A first time in 1951, when Mossadegh asked him to leave the country to calm tensions. A second time in August 1953, when the first coup d'etat failed. He watched from Rome as Italian television announced that his supporters had finally triumphed. He returned, knowing exactly to whom he owed his throne. And he doesn't forget it. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi will lead Iran for 26 years, from 1953 to 1979. 26 years, during which the country will experience real modernization. Roads, universities, partial emancipation of women, industrialization. And 26 years during which anyone who dares say aloud what Mossadegh said risks prison, torture, or disappearance. The instrument of this repression has a name: SAVAK. In Persian, Sazemane Etelat va Amniyat Keshvar, National Security and Information Organization. Created in 1957, 4 years after the coup d'etat. Created with the direct help of the American CIA and Israeli Mossad, who train its agents, provide its techniques, supervise its methods. SAVAK quickly becomes one of the most feared secret police forces in the world. Its agents infiltrate universities, unions, mosques, intellectual circles, professional associations. They recruit informants in every building, in every administration, in every military unit. The Shah himself will deliberately maintain the rumor that 1 in 3 Iranians works for SAVAK. Not because it's true, but because the fear of being watched is more effective than surveillance itself. When you don't know who's an agent, you end up trusting no one. And when you trust no one, you don't organize. That's the logic of preventive terror. It works. The exact figures will never be known, but testimonies collected after 1979, Amnesty International reports from the 1970s, and archives partially opened since, paint a coherent picture. Thousands of political prisoners at any given time. Documented methods: electricity, burns, suspension, sleep deprivation. Disappearances. Discrete executions presented as escape attempts. Among the victims, communists, yes, but also secular nationalists in Mossadegh's tradition, trade unionists, students, journalists, lawyers, professors, Shiite religious figures who dare criticize the regime. Anyone who represents a threat to the order established by the Shah and guaranteed by Washington. Because that's where the story becomes uncomfortable for Western democracies. SAVAK is trained by the CIA and Mossad. Its budgets are partially financed by American aid. Its methods are known in Washington. Reports circulate, ambassadors send cables, journalists publish articles. In 1976, Amnesty International declares that Iran, under the Shah, has the highest execution rate in the world without fair trial. The American State Department produces internal reports that recognize the systematic use of torture. And all this time, successive American presidents receive the Shah at the White House, sell him weapons, qualify him as a pillar of regional stability, as a bulwark against communism. Jimmy Carter, during his New Year's toast in 1978 in Tehran, 1 year before the revolution, says of the Shah that he leads an island of stability in a sea of troubles. These words will come back to haunt him. What Washington sees in the Shah isn't a dictator. It's a partner. a partner who maintains order in a strategic region, who buys American weapons, several $billion in the 1970s, who keeps Iran in the Western camp, and who participates in an economic system we'll discuss in a few minutes, and which far exceeds the simple oil question. But in the streets of Tehran, in the universities of Isfahan, in the bazaars of Shiraz,
Shah's reality isn't that of a Washington partner. It's that of a man who took power on the rubble of Iranian democracy, who tortures his opponents with tools provided by his foreign allies, and who lives in obscene luxury while part of his population survives in misery. In 1971, the Shah organizes at Persepolis a party to celebrate the 2500th anniversary of the Persian Empire. 2,500 guests, heads of state from around the world. Maxims of Paris delivers food by plane. Hundreds of luxury tents built in the desert. A decor that makes the cover of all magazines. Estimated cost? Between $200 and $300 million. In Iranian countryside, that same autumn 1971, families still light themselves by candle. For 26 years, this gap only widens. The Shah's modernization benefits an educated urban class, often linked to the regime or to foreign interests. It leaves aside millions of people uprooted by forced industrialization, transplanted into slums around Tehran, deprived of traditional landmarks without having received new ones. These people don't read leftist newspapers. They don't know Mossadegh. They don't know what the CIA is. But they know what humiliation is. And they know who speaks their language, who knows their first names, who gives them food during religious ceremonies. The Shiite clergy. It's in this void, the void created by the repression of all secular, nationalist, union or communist opposition, that Khomeini will rush in. SAVAK has so methodically destroyed all political alternatives that when anger finally explodes in 1978, only one organization remains standing, still capable of mobilizing, still endowed with an intact national network: the mosques. The West helped destroy Iranian democracy in 1953. It then helped maintain the dictatorship that occupied the space left empty. And in that space, slowly, silently, something else grew. Something that neither the CIA nor MI6 nor the Shah had foreseen. We must stop for a moment on something that the usual narratives of this story almost always pass over in silence. Something that happens in 1973, 20 years after the coup d'etat, and which explains why the revolution of 1979 didn't only frighten Washington on an ideological or geopolitical level. It frightened it on a financial level, in a way few people still measure today. To understand this, we have to go back to 1971. Richard Nixon does something bold and brutal at the same time. He unilaterally decrees the end of the dollar's convertibility into gold. Since 1944 and the Bretton Woods agreements, the American dollar was the world's reference currency because it was backed by gold. Each dollar in circulation corresponded to a gold reserve at Fort Knox. Nixon cuts this link. The dollar is no longer backed by anything physical. This gesture solves an immediate American problem. The United States spends more than it produces, finances the Vietnam War on credit, and its gold reserves are dangerously dwindling. But it creates another, deeper problem. If the dollar is no longer backed by gold, why would the rest of the world continue to use it as a reference currency? Nixon and his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, find the answer. And this answer is called oil. In 1973 and 1974, the United States secretly negotiates with Saudi Arabia an agreement of considerable scope.
The two countries agree on two things. First, Saudi Arabia will sell its oil exclusively in American dollars. Second, the other OPEC countries will follow. In exchange, Washington guarantees military security for the Saudi regime and sells it large-scale armaments. The agreement is simple in its formulation, revolutionary in its consequences. From now on, every country in the world that wants to buy oil, meaning every country in the world, without exception, must first buy American dollars. Oil demand automatically becomes dollar demand. The dollar is no longer backed by gold. It's backed by oil, by energy, by the vital necessity of every human economy on the planet. This is the petrodollar system. And it's this system that since 1974 maintains American financial power independently of what the United States actually produces. Iran, under the Shah, fully participates in this system. Iranian oil is sold in dollars. Iranian petrodollars are partially recycled into American treasury bonds and purchases of American armaments. The Shah is a pillar of the system, not just military and geopolitical, but financial. And then 1979 arrives. Khomeini takes power. And among the Islamic Republic's first economic decisions, there's one that goes almost unnoticed in the revolution's noise, but that will resonate in the American Treasury offices like a silent declaration of war. Iran begins to sell its oil in currencies other than the dollar. This isn't trivial. It's a direct attack on the financial architecture upon which American power has rested since 1974. Every country that sells its oil outside the dollar weakens global dollar demand. If the movement spreads, if other countries follow the Iranian example, the petrodollar system erodes. And with it, the United States' ability to finance its debts, its wars, its trade deficit by simply printing bills the world is obliged to accept. This detail illuminates something important. American sanctions against Iran that have succeeded one another since 1979, that have intensified decade after decade, that have strangled the Iranian economy far beyond what any nuclear dossier justified. These sanctions have a logic that goes beyond ideology. They aim to keep Iran out of the global financial system, to prevent it from trading outside the dollar, to ensure that no other country is tempted to follow the same path. The petrodollar is the reason Iran will never simply be forgiven. Not because its leaders are dangerous. Other dangerous leaders have been rehabilitated. Not because its nuclear program is threatening. Other countries have nuclear programs and maintain cordial relations with Washington. But because Iran, since 1979, represents a precedent. The living demonstration that a country can exit the petrodollar system and survive. And that Washington cannot afford to let exist without response. On January 7, 1978, an article appears in the Iranian newspaper Ayatollah. It's signed with a pseudonym. It violently attacks Ayatollah Khomeini, exiled in Iraq since 1964 for having dared criticize the Shah, calling him a foreign agent, a man without honor, an instrument of Iran's enemies. The article is crude, clumsy, obviously commissioned by SAVAK. It produces the opposite effect of the one expected. The next day, in the holy city of Qom, thousands of theology students descend into the streets to protest. The police shoot. Demonstrators die. In the Shiite tradition, the 40th day after a death is a day of mourning and gathering. 40 days after Qom, there are new demonstrations, new deaths. And 40 days after these deaths, still more.
A cycle of mourning that becomes a cycle of rebellion. A mechanism nobody had anticipated, and nobody knows how to stop. Throughout 1978, Iran progressively catches fire. But here's what superficial analyses systematically miss about this revolution. Look at who descends into Tehran's streets in 1978. It's not only theology students, it's engineers, doctors, lawyers, university professors, bazaar merchants, oil refinery workers, women in jeans as much as veiled women. These are people who, for many of them, aren't particularly religious, but who have in common 26 years of accumulated frustration, 26 years of SAVAK, 26 years of state corruption, 26 years of seeing the country's oil wealth go to the West while public services deteriorate. 26 years since a democratically elected man was overthrown in the night by crowds bought with foreign money. Portraits of Mossadegh circulate in the demonstrations of 1978. Few people mention them in official narratives of the Islamic Revolution, but they're there, in the hands of those who know, like a silent reminder of what was stolen from them 25 years earlier. Contrary to what the mullahs will say afterward, Iranians don't rise up in 1979 to establish a theocracy. They rise up against torture, against humiliation, against a regime that stole their democracy with the West's blessing. It's a plural, complex movement, bringing together secular nationalists, Marxists, constitutional liberals, trade unionists, and religious figures. A heterogeneous coalition united by a single common objective: bring down the Shah. Khomeini understands this coalition better than anyone. From his exile, first in Iraq, then at Neaufleux-le-Château in France, 40 kilometers from Paris, he sends his messages recorded on audio cassettes that circulate clandestinely throughout all of Iran. He speaks of justice, of dignity, of resistance to foreign oppression. He says almost nothing of the theocracy he has in mind. He says what people want to hear, and people hear him. On January 16, 1979, the Shah boards a plane at Tehran Military Airport. He's sick, a lymphatic system cancer he's been hiding for months. He publicly says he's going on vacation. Everyone knows he won't return. Soldiers weep on the tarmac. Others smile. In Tehran's streets, at the news announcement, millions of people spontaneously come out. The joy is real, immense, uncontrollable. 2 weeks later, on February 1st, 1979, Khomeini lands in Tehran after 15 years of exile. 5 million people await him on the route from the airport. On February 11th, the army declares its neutrality. The imperial regime collapses in a few hours. Washington observes all this with stupor mixed with panic. Carter had qualified Iran as an island of stability 13 months earlier. His advisors had assured him the Shah was solid, that SAVAK controlled the situation, that opponents were marginal. Everything he'd been told was false. And now something else happens, something that will crystallize for an entire generation the nature of relations between Iran and the United States. The Shah, sick, seeks a country to welcome him. France refuses. Egypt accepts temporarily. Mexico gives him a visa, then withdraws it. In October 1979, Carter authorizes the Shah to enter the United States to receive medical treatment. It's a humanitarian decision, they argue. Perhaps it's true. For Iranians, it's something else. For Iranians, it's confirmation of what they suspected. The man who tortured them for 26 years. The man the CIA installed on their throne by overthrowing their democracy. This man finds refuge in Washington when he needs it. Like in 1953. The United States always protects its instruments, even worn, even rejected by their own people. On November 4th, 1979, Iranian students storm the American embassy in Tehran. They take 66 diplomats hostage. They'll keep them 444 days. Why the embassy? Why this precise building? Because it's in this building that Kermit Roosevelt had coordinated part of his operations in 1953. Because for Iranian students of 1979, the American embassy isn't just a diplomatic representation. It's the physical, concrete, localizable symbol of the interference that stole their democracy. They explicitly fear that the CIA will start again, that the hospitality granted to the Shah is the first act of a new Operation Ajax. They call the embassy the nest of spies. They don't yet know how much the archives they'll find inside will prove them right. Among documents discovered in the embassy offices, telegrams, reports, lists of Iranian contacts, proof that the American embassy maintained information networks within the revolutionary government itself, that the CIA hadn't stopped working in Iran, that 1953 wasn't a historical anomaly, it was a method. The hostage crisis will last 444 days. It will politically destroy Carter's presidency. It will install Ronald Reagan in the White House. And it will freeze for decades Iran's image in Western public eyes. A country of fanatics who take diplomats hostage, led by an old bearded man who calls America the Great Satan. What this image carefully erases is the question of why. Why a country of 40 million people, with a civilization of 2,500 years, a literature among the world's richest, engineers, doctors, architects. Why this country arrived at this point? What wound, inflicted by whom, under what documented circumstances, produced this explosion? The answer has a precise date. It's called August 19th, 1953. Let's stop here. Let's take height. Look at the whole of what we've just gone through together, no longer as a succession of events, but as a structure, a mechanism, something that repeats. In 1901, a foreign power obtains the right to exploit a weakened country's natural resources by buying signatures. In 1953, when this country democratically attempts to reclaim what belongs to it, the same power, helped by another, overthrows its elected government, installs a dictator, and trains his secret police. For 26 years, this dictator tortures his opponents with tools provided by his Western protectors, until the pressure becomes unbearable, until everything explodes. That's the mechanism, in its mechanical brutality. And here's what this mechanism systematically produces each time it's applied. It doesn't solve the problem it claims to solve. It transforms it. It takes a democratic aspiration. Mossadegh wanted hospitals, roads, schools financed by his country's oil, and it compresses it, represses it, strangles it for decades, until it comes out in a form nobody wanted, more radical, harder, more difficult to untangle. This isn't a law of nature, it's a law of politics. When you crush a legitimate aspiration by force, you don't destroy it, you transform it. Mossadegh wanted a secular and sovereign democracy. The CIA crushed this aspiration. 26 years later, what came out of this crushing was called Khomeini, who himself compressed and repressed the seculars, Marxists, nationalists who had made the revolution with him, who confiscated a plural revolution to make it a theocracy, creating in turn new compressions, new frustrations that still seek today their form of exit. That's the cycle, and it has no natural end. It has only a decided end. But there's an additional layer to all this, a layer we began to explore and that must now be clearly named to understand what's happening in 2026. The petrodollar. Remember what we saw. In 1974, the United States builds with Saudi Arabia a system that backs the dollar's value no longer to gold, but to oil. A system that forces every country in the world to use dollars to buy the energy it needs to function. A system that transforms all of humanity's energy necessity into perpetual demand for American currency. Iran, under the Shah, is a pillar of this system. Its petrodollars feed American treasury bonds. Its weapons purchases maintain the American military industry. It's integrated, dependent, useful. And in 1979, Iran exits this system. It's not just an ideological affront, it's a structural threat. If Iran can sell its oil outside the dollar and survive, others can attempt the same thing. And if enough countries attempt the same thing, the petrodollar erodes. With it, the United States' ability to finance its expenses by printing a currency the world is obliged to accept. That's why sanctions against Iran don't resemble any other sanction in modern diplomatic history. That's why they've lasted for 46 years. That's why every agreement, every negotiation, every normalization attempt ends up stumbling on something that exceeds the nuclear question. The nuclear is the presentable pretext. The petrodollar is the deep reason. And that's why what you see on your screens in 2026, the war, the missiles, the proxies, the sanctions, the axis of resistance, the Revolutionary Guards, the Houthis, Hezbollah, all this isn't the product of millennial religious hatred. All this is the product of a documented causal chain that begins in the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company offices in 1901, passes through Kermit Roosevelt's briefcase in 1953, crosses 26 years of SAVAK cells, explodes in 1979, and continues to unfold with a logic nothing has yet interrupted. This mechanism has a name. We could call it the mechanism of confiscated resources, or the mechanism of sacrificed democracy. But in its simplest formulation, it says this: when a foreign power crushes a people's sovereignty to control its resources, it doesn't solve the instability problem. It postpones it. And when it returns, it's more violent, more radical, and infinitely more costly to treat than what we wanted to stifle. This mechanism isn't specific to Iran. It applied to Guatemala in 1954. 1 year after Ajax, the CIA overthrows another democratically elected government that had dared nationalize lands belonging to an American company. It applied to Chile in 1973, to Congo in 1960, to many other places whose names don't make Western newspaper headlines. Each time the same structure: the resource, the interference, the installed dictator, the price paid by peoples, the bill that arrives years or decades later in a form nobody chose. So here's the question this video leaves you with. Not a rhetorical question, a real question to which only you can answer. If you were Iranian, if you had grown up with Mossadegh's story, learned at home because schools don't talk about it, if you'd had a father, an uncle, a friend who had been arrested by SAVAK, if you'd seen your country economically strangled for 4 decades by sanctions, whose architects know perfectly well their real origin, if you knew that the company that pillaged your country's subsoil is today called BP and makes profits every quarter, what would you feel toward those who did this to you? This isn't justifying violence. It's not excusing Khomeini's regime crimes, and there are some. It's not saying Iran is always right
and the West always wrong. It's simply asking, where does this hatred come from? And can we honestly claim it's irrational, inexplicable, essentially religious, when we know what we've just seen together? If violence led to peace, then peace would have reigned for decades in this region of the world. It doesn't reign, which should lead us to ask a different question. Not how to win the next war, but how to exit the cycle. The answer to this question isn't found in missiles, it's found in understanding. And understanding begins exactly where we've just spent time together. In the archives, in the dates, in the names, in the mechanisms nobody teaches us to see. Because a mechanism we don't see, we can't dismantle. This work, the weeks of research, the declassified archives, the cross-checked sources, the nights verifying dates and names, it exists because you're here. Because you chose to spend this hour with an analysis that doesn't simplify them world for you, but gives you the tools to see it as it is. If this video brought you something, if it changed the way you'll read the next headlines about Iran, if it gave you a question to ask next time someone tells you this hatred is ancient and inevitable, then do something concrete. Subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, share this video with someone asking themselves the same questions as you. This content isn't pushed by the algorithm. It doesn't make noise. It doesn't shout. Every gesture you make, a like, a share, a subscription, is the only way for it to exist beyond those who've already found it. We started this video with an image, that of newspapers worldwide headlining about the Iran war, about Iran-Israel, about missiles and proxies and sanctions. An image that gives the impression of a conflict come from nowhere, carried by obscure and ancestral forces nobody really understands. You now know where it comes from. You know it has a precise, documented origin, signed by men, some of whom left their memoirs. That this origin is called 1953, that it's called Mossadegh in pajamas fleeing by a garden ladder, that it's called A Briefcase of Money and a Man Answering to the Name James Lockwood, that it's called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which still exists and which is called BP. Truth doesn't descend from above. It's built down here, with archives, with dates, with the patience to refuse easy explanations. You've just understood that the revolution of 1979 wasn't just a religious revolution. It was an exit from the petrodollar, a direct attack on the financial architecture maintaining American power since 1974. And facing that, Washington had a problem. You can't invade a country of 40 million people who just overthrew a Shah for getting too close to the West. But you can find someone else. Someone who has his own reasons to attack Iran. Someone you can arm, finance, inform, and on. September 22nd, 1980. This man sends his tanks across the Iranian border. His name is Saddam Hussein. What the West provided him for this war, the weapons, satellite intelligence, and something far more serious than you don't yet imagine. That's what the next video will show. Declassified documents, cited names, signed decisions. It's displaying just to the right of your screen. And never forget one thing. Don't take my word for it. Always verify for yourself.